Hello, I'm Matthew Frank, Director of the Simon Center on Religion and the Constitution at the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, New Jersey. I'm filling in for Professor George, Robert George, the founder of the American Principles Project. Professor George, as many EWTN viewers may know, was recently hospitalized, but he's recuperating nicely at home now and is grateful for everyone's prayers. While he's away, I'm your host for Candidate Conversations. Candidate Conversations features in-depth, one-on-one conversations with 2016 presidential candidates on the important issues of moral and constitutional principle facing American Catholics and our fellow citizens today. Our guest today is former Governor Jim Gilmore of Virginia. Governor, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Matt.
I'll begin right away with a fundamental question, if you will. I'd like to know what, in your opinion, are the principles, the ideals, the institutions that you regard as pillars of our civilization and our society? Are they under assault today? And if so, by whom or by what forces? And what would be your strategy for defending or rebuilding those pillars?
Well, that's about 4 questions, but I'll see if I can get you to prompt me on them as we go forward. Well, first of all, your viewers ought to know where I've come from. My father was a working man. He was a meat cutter. My mother was a secretary. She ended up her career as the secretary for the bishop of the Methodist Church. So I come out of a middle-class background, went to public school, then went to the University of Virginia, where we were really taught a lot about these American principles and about these ideas. And I think that I have put those principles within myself over the years. And then after a time in the United States Army, I also went to the University of Virginia School of Law, where I studied constitutional law, and I studied these kinds of principles in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and these values. So I'm taking them all the way through the rest of my life and right here into the time here with this interview with you today. So what are those principles? Well, it's the principles of the free society, of the liberal society, if you will, with a small L. And it's the notion that people ought to live as free as possible, which means that we should live in a society in which there is a democracy, in which people actually, their views are actually matter and where their votes actually matter, the rule of law, the idea of our values as a Christian society. I am a Methodist and believe that my belief in Christ is a part of my background and part of what's in me all the time, no matter what I'm doing or where I am. The advancement of women, the notion of the free market system, which has been the greatness of American society and has allowed Americans to grow and to gain wealth and opportunity and more independence and liberty as they've done that. These are the fundamental principles that we have today. And certainly faith and the established church is a pillar of that society. It's really what holds people together without having to be watched all the time or worry about the law all the time. It means that it creates a society where there's a sense of ethics and morals within the community that self-govern, as opposed to having to have a policeman looking over your shoulder all the time.
Yeah.
So these are the fundamental principles. And why are they under assault? Well, they are under assault. I think they're under assault from people from the left who have a sincere belief that they think that their ideas are better and that they can manage people much more closely. They can do that through regulations, they do that through laws, and they are, if anyway, in a way, disempowering people within the community and within society. And I think that they are under assault. I think there's a culture today that is promoted, particularly in the media and particularly on television, that in a way replaces the community and the family and faith as the foundation of those ideas and those principles. And that is pushed forward today. And yes, I do believe that we're under assault from that.
So what I hear you saying, Governor, is that there's been a kind of inversion of the founders' notion that the state is answerable to civil society. And now a struggle has ensued in which the state calls upon civil society to be answerable to it. And so free persons are somehow imposed upon by a state that does not recognize their autonomy as free persons and the little platoons of their civil society and their interactions with each other as free persons. Is that what's going on?
I think that is the essence of the fundamental problem that we're facing today, and I think that it came about in the 20th century when the government decided, because of the Great Depression and things after that, that things could be managed much more, people could be managed more, society could be managed more. And as a result, you see this complete set of regulations, which particularly controls the electoral system, which is making people very frustrated, a sense of powerlessness. It very much controls the market and the economy of the United States. The Federal Reserve at this point believes that it is the ultimate place where the society can be regulated up and down through Keynesian economics, something I think that really hasn't worked all that well, honestly. The notion that we have a welfare society, which means that people can look to the state for their fundamental support.
Yeah.
No matter where they are or who they are, they can look to that. And then, of course, there are an awful lot of regulations that go along with the welfare society that invades people's private lives. For example, if we create a society where we have an expectation that the welfare state is going to look after children, then that means that they have a right, don't they, to decide how that child is going to live within the society and within the family. And in fact, children can be taken away from mothers, and single mothers face that danger all the time when they're thrown into the welfare state. The trade-off is we don't want to have a society where people are on the streets, where in previous centuries you've had abject poverty that has driven children, for example, into the workplace too early, mothers into positions of dreadful stress. So this is the trade-off that we've come to. But right now, Matt, I think that we've arrived at a point where people feel that they're almost in an iron cage because of all the regulations.
Yeah, that's
and as
quite
a result,
an image.
Yeah, and they want to break out.
Yeah.
And now in 2016, this presidential campaign, I think you're seeing some of that frustration and anger come out. Now, I believe, as a candidate for president, that it's being expressed by and the support is going to candidates where it should not go. But right now, I think that resentment, frustration, and anger is being represented in the presidential campaign.
It's a very interesting image of the iron cage. It's clearly it follows from what you're saying, Governor, that the state, the government ought to be doing a lot less than it's doing now in some fields, allowing more freedom of speech, more freedom of markets, more respect for property rights. But there are also some things it's doing now, like aid to the poor and trying to construct a safety net for people, that it could be doing better and smarter rather than not at all.
Well, I'm not one that believes that you can go back to a completely lawless society and live in a state of nature. I don't think that we're in a position in the 21st century to do that. But it's very easy when you begin to regulate people to continue to regulate people harder and harder and harder until...
Because you can.
Yeah, because you can, and because you think that you know what kind of outcome is really better, as opposed to leaving it to the society, the families, and to the economy itself. And I think we've gone too far there. So as a presidential candidate, I can tell you that one of the things I will work to do when I'm the President of the United States is to really evaluate this and to see what we can do to begin to reduce this burden and to reduce this and liberate people a great deal more. Now, I think that along with that goes the empowerment of people. Now, as you probably know, I'm on the board of the NRA. I believe in the empowerment of people. That's why I'm on that board. It's not that I wave a gun around all the time. It's that I believe in the empowerment of people, and that the Second Amendment speaks to that issue. Well, likewise, I'm a strong believer in the free market and the ability to start businesses, to have control over your own lives by doing that, not being dependent on the welfare state. Some must be, I suppose, but I would really love to see such a vigorous economy and such an opportunity for growth and advancement of people economically and spiritually and otherwise, that really that we could begin to see a withering away of this iron cage, and I would like to do that.
Wow. Let me come to a foundational principle for many of our viewers, and I suspect it may be one for you as well. The 14th Amendment, as you know, proud graduate of Mr. Jefferson's University, says that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. The amendment also specifically gives to Congress the power to, quote, enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Do you believe that unborn babies are persons whose equal right to life is protected or should be protected under the 14th Amendment? Would you call on Congress to use that Section 5 authority to protect the unborn? Or do you believe you're obligated to defer to what the Supreme Court said in 1973 in Roe v. Wade until such time as the opinion might be reversed by a future court or by constitutional amendment?
That's two questions. Let me see if I can address both. First of all, I'm a University of Virginia trained lawyer. I understand the role of the United States Supreme Court in our society, and I believe you have to be respectful of the law in this country. Roe v. Wade is a incorrectly decided decision. I believe it was plucked from the thin air. There was really no legal foundation for it. And I believe that it will be reviewed as time goes on the basis that it was not sound legally. Now, on the other hand, I think that a culture has been created in the country that has supported that amendment, or that I call it an amendment, that court decision.
It's kind of a de facto amendment.
It kind of is a de facto amendment that has created that. So I believe that the culture of the United States is the most important thing. The law follows the culture, I believe. The law follows the culture. So I think there's still time for the community, in particular the community of your viewers, to actually reshape the culture of this country in such a way as to, in fact, protect the life of the unborn child. And yes, as my record as governor of Virginia speaks for itself. I was a pro-life governor, and I'm a pro-life candidate now. And my record is that when I was the governor, we passed uninformed consent. This is an example of what you just said. It's, can you shape things through legislation in order to provide the protections and also to reshape the culture? And we did. We passed an informed consent bill while I was the governor, which I pushed for and achieved. We passed a 24-hour waiting period while I was the governor. We passed a partial birth abortion ban when I was the governor. Now, that was later overturned by the United States Supreme Court, and I'm not going to defy the Supreme Court. If they've spoken, they've spoken. But the fact is that the community that is viewing this, your community and mine, and all the rest of us have actually, I think, won the partial birth abortion issue, haven't we?
Sure. I mean, really, later federal law was upheld by the Supreme Court when Justice Kennedy saw some difference between that and the earlier state laws.
So I believe that the culture, in fact, can be created, and then that sets the groundwork for the court decisions to follow the culture. And I think that can, in fact, be done. Remember when I was the governor, we did a few more things as well. I passed or signed an executive order myself that said that we were not going to put any more state regulations in until we understood the impact on the family and on the community surrounding the family. So that executive order went into place, and anyone that wanted to pass or promote or propose new regulations had to actually write how that would have an adverse impact. During the time that I was a governor, human cloning began to become a possibility. The laboratories began to announce that they were in a position to do human cloning. I proposed the passage of a ban on human cloning in Virginia, which passed. Not because I'm anti-science. I'm not anti-science.
No.
It's because I didn't think that the values and culture and mores of the society had caught up with the science.
Right.
So I passed that bill when I was the governor. And maybe the other one was I actually intervened in a right-to-death case. It was the Hugh Finn case.
I remember the Hugh Finn case. I was living in Virginia at the time.
Well, it was an awful experience for me as governor. I cared a lot about values and about human life. And this was a case where a person was allegedly in a comatose situation, and that there was no value in that life any longer, and the wife wanted to end that life and move on with hers. Okay, but the other family members all over the place came to me and came to my assistance and said, listen, this is not factual. There are times when he in fact does come out of this and is lucid. Well, I had no way of knowing. I'm not a physician. And I'm not there to observe what was going on the way the family was. But out of my respect for value of life, and because once it's over, I intervened in that case and said, look, let's take a pause until we can get a further evaluation of this as to what's really going on. And I believe that that was an expression of a right to life issue in a very meaningful way. And as you know, Matt, if you were there, you know the dreadful, awful, political, terrible controversy that became.
It didn't end well at the Virginia Supreme Court either, as I recall.
No,
it was
it
kind of a precursor of the Terry Schiavo situation.
It was indeed.
Not as well known.
Just like the Terry Schiavo case, and it was a dreadful experience for me as the governor to stand up for my principles and what I thought was a genuine life issue, and to take the kind of abuse that I did. I still have the scars today. You can look at them if you like.
Yeah.
But that the point of discussing this with your viewers is that this is the kind of governor that I was and the kind of president I shall be.
So it sounds like, though, on the Section 5 power under the 14th Amendment, you're in favor of a more incremental approach until the culture comes along, and then perhaps congressional action might be appropriate to protect unborn life.
As opposed to?
I mean, the question.
You don't mean a defiance of the law.
No, I mean an assertion by Congress of its textual authority in the 14th Amendment to legislate on the protection of unborn life.
Now, I'm not opposed to that.
Okay.
But I would guard against your viewers believing that that's just an easy answer, because if
it would be a steep haul.
Well, first of all, to pass it, but second of all, if the court deems that that statute is contrary to fundamental rights within the Constitution, they would simply void it. And I just want your viewers to understand that's the way the law works.
It would certainly set up a conflict. Yeah, absolutely. But this, in a way, this brings me right into the center of my next question. No one denies that sometimes the Supreme Court gets it wrong, the Constitution. We've just talked about Roe versus Wade, which you and I agree was dreadfully wrong. They were wrong about slavery in Dred Scott. They were wrong a century ago about worker protection in Lochner versus New York.
The sick chicken case, I think.
Yeah. No, it was the Baker's working hours case.
Okay.
This year, the Supreme Court imposed same-sex marriage on the country in Obergefell versus Hodges. So I want to ask a question, but let me ask it with a little bit of detail here, because we want to know how a president or Congress, together with the president, can respond when the Supreme Court usurps the authority of the people and their representatives by inventing rights, by issuing edicts lacking any warrant in the Constitution. Some people say that a president must always accept the court's interpretation of the Constitution, no matter how dubious as the law of the land, binding not just on the parties who litigated the case, but on everyone, including oath-swearing public officials like the president. Abraham Lincoln, as you may recall, vehemently disagreed. He said in his first inaugural address in 1861 that to treat unconstitutional court rulings as binding law would be for the people to, quote, Lincoln now, practically resign their government into the hands of that eminent tribunal, the Supreme Court. And Lincoln acted on this belief. He supported and signed legislation in 1862 that defied Dred Scott by banning slavery in all the federal territories. And he issued instructions to his cabinet departments to issue passports and patents to free black citizens of the United States, which defied the Supreme Court's holding that they were not to be considered citizens. So was Lincoln right or wrong to act in this way and to act on this belief? Was he right to reject judicial supremacy, or do you side with those who say, no, what the Supreme Court says is the Constitution, effectively is the Constitution? We have, right in front of us now, the Obergefell decision on same-sex marriage. Would you treat that specifically as the law of the land?
Well, there are a couple of aspects of this. Number one, Lincoln, of course, took his actions in the middle of the Great Civil War, where the issue of slavery was to be determined not by the Supreme Court, but by the force of arms, ultimately. And remember, it was really never legalized until after the war was over, and the 13th and the 14th Amendment were then adopted by into the United States Constitution, which put the debate far beyond any issue of whether or not you were going to have judicial power versus executive power. Sure. Lincoln ultimately deferred to the Constitution and actually got amendments passed. That was, by the way, the subject of the movie, as I'm sure as you probably know.
Yes, the Spielberg film.
The Spielberg film was not about what you would think. It was about the passage of the 14th Amendment. So the point is that a president can lead and begin to set the stage for legal change that is appropriate and reasonable. And as President of the United States, I think that I would be in a position to set some of those standards down and to move the country in the proper direction. And I believe in this principle. You can speak over the heads of the court and over the heads of the elected Congress, legislators in the Congress, and speak directly to the people and begin to frame these kinds of issues. I find my experience is the politics goes much better if you do that. You may remember, Matt, if you were in Virginia during the time that I ran and was elected on cutting the car tax. Well, I can assure you the legislature didn't want to cut the car tax. They didn't want to cut any taxes. But I had gone over their heads to the people during the election process and said that that was what we were going to do, and it passed almost unanimously within the General Assembly. Well, likewise, a president can address these issues in an appropriate and proper and moral and legal way and win over the American people into a sense of direction, and the Congress will follow the people, I believe, and that is my hope. As for the Obergefell decision, I believe that marriage should be between one man and one woman. And I believe that the community of this country, the community that we're speaking to right now, is in a position to begin to help frame that culture also. Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny. First of all, I'm not disrespectful of people in the gay community, homosexual community. I'm not.
Yeah, I think our viewers would understand that that's not what this is about.
Sure. This is not what this is about, and I do not intend to demean anyone, nor to behave in a disrespectful way towards anyone on this. And I believe actually other institutions could have been developed to address the issue of gay marriage that never were addressed.
Civil unions, for instance.
For example, that could have been done.
Sure.
But frankly, when people who were opposed to gay marriage held the line and never would consider any other alternatives, and the gay community would not insisted entirely upon an actual sacrament of marriage, then at that point there was no ability to meet anywhere to where the entire society could have been made more satisfactory. So the bottom line is that I believe differently from the way things are today.
Should the American people just take the matter, though, as settled by the Supreme Court decision 6 months ago?
Well, the gay community didn't do that. They took the position that the settled law was not right.
Right.
And they went to work to change America around so that a decision like that would be acceptable. So therefore, there's really no reason at this point why that discussion can't go on now on an ongoing basis. Now, I recognize that the court is put into a position where there are established relationships that have been sanctified by a marriage law at this point.
Right.
But to make these adjustments in the future, I think can still occur.
Okay. Something came to light in that same-sex marriage ruling that is of grave concern to many Americans today, to Catholics and not only to Catholics, but our bishops, the Catholic bishops, have expressed deep concerns over the future of religious liberty, and especially the emerging attempt to punish those of us who believe that marriage is between a husband and a wife, a man and a woman. So Catholics, evangelicals, Mormons, Orthodox Jews, and others have been penalized or fired from government jobs. Our adoption agencies have been excluded from helping orphan children find good homes. This has happened not just to Catholic charities, but also to evangelical Lutheran children's services agencies. And small business owners, as I'm sure you've heard, have faced bankrupting fines from government agencies at the state level for declining to facilitate same-sex ceremonies, bakers, photographers, florists. In his dissent in the Obergefell case on same-sex marriage, Chief Justice John Roberts, no wild-eyed radical said that he said, quoting now, "The Solicitor General candidly acknowledged," this was during oral arguments, "that the tax exemptions of some religious institutions would be in question if they opposed same-sex marriage. There is little doubt," the Chief Justice went on, "that these and similar questions will soon be before this court. Unfortunately, people of faith can take no comfort in the treatment they receive from the majority today." End of quote from Chief Justice Roberts. Now, these are serious religious liberty threats, according to our bishops, according to the Chief Justice himself. As president, what would you do to protect the rights of Christians and other dissenters from the new normal on gay marriage? Would you specifically seek passage of and sign the First Amendment Defense Act, which is now under consideration in the Congress?
I'm going to look at that act and withhold a decision about whether I'm going to give a blanket endorsement of that act at this time, but I'll instead talk about some principles that I think may give your viewers some peace of mind. Just as we talked at the very beginning of this conversation about government's instinct right now to force people to do things, to regulate people, to make them, to make the society do things the way that the government wants it to do, and my very great disapproval of that. That's the essence of this question that you're asking me right now. I don't believe people should be forced. I don't think government should be forcing. I believe this. I believe that the Catholic institutions, frankly, all religious institutions, if they have a tax-exempt status, it's because they're a legitimate church
Right.
and institution of faith. To then violate that by a threat of the reduction of the tax-exempt status because the faith institution or the church won't do exactly what the government says, I think is wrong and is immoral and is frankly probably illegal. It's a forcing of using the force to have a particular philosophy that I disapprove of. So I'm not in favor, for example, of people in commercial activities who have a legitimate faith-based objection to being forced or penalized or fined or lose their jobs or something of this nature. I'm not in favor of that. And as the president, I think I could speak out against that. Now, let me be real clear. Government officials who say that they're going to obey the law and take an oath to obey the law must obey the law or step away from that particular role and take a different role in society that is perhaps more amenable to their points of view.
Should some accommodation be made to enable them to step aside without sacrificing their position in a government agency? Say the Kim Davis situation in Kentucky, for instance. If Kentucky law permitted her to step away and let clerks in her office issue the marriage licenses that were at issue in her case several months ago, would that be an appropriate solution? Or should she simply be held to a standard that this is the law, you must involve yourself personally because you're an oath-swearing public official?
I believe that an accommodation could be made so long as the law was adhered to by the appropriate official office.
Okay.
I believe that would work. But that would frankly be up to the authorities that elected her or put her in office as to whether or not she should continue to hold that kind of office.
Or some relevant provision of Kentucky law that might come to her aid, perhaps.
Perhaps so. The main thing is that, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm going to be a spokesman for the violation of the law and Constitution, because I'm not. I'm just telling you, I'm not. Yeah. People who take an oath of office, and I've taken many, and I've sworn to uphold the law, have to uphold the law. Now, that doesn't mean she has to be forced to do it as long as she doesn't impede her office from doing it appropriately and the appropriate authority is done.
In recent days, there was a case related to these that's happening now in Massachusetts, actually. There's a trial court in the Massachusetts state judicial system which has told an order of religious sisters in the Catholic Church who run a girls' high school that they must hire a man who's in a same-sex marriage with another man, something that wasn't divulged until they made an offer to him to come on the staff of their school, I think in some capacity outside the faculty, but on the staff of their school. And they withdrew the offer of employment to him when he divulged in some forms he was filling out that he was in a same-sex marriage. Now a Massachusetts court has told these sisters they must employ him or face the consequences of discriminating, as it's put. So, I mean, we're seeing this future coming down the pike at us as well, where the state or private litigants invoking discrimination statutes are coming after religious institutions and people in the private sector who have religious qualms about same-sex marriage. What should we? What principles should guide us in cases like this?
It's the most troubling example you could possibly have put forward. Because the private school, the private parochial school, ought to be able to behave itself in accordance with the tenets of its faith. It ought to be able to do that. We have a long body of law, though, where we've disapproved of people discriminating on the basis of, for example, race. We would never permit that. We would never permit that in the society. So now we have to face this challenge of what do you do when it is a faith-based objection based upon biblical principles of the scriptures, as opposed to, for example, a racial discrimination. Sure. I think these are matters that are yet to be determined.
Right. Well, speaking of schools, the Obama administration has been busy on another front that's related to these matters. Its Department of Education has issued an edict of sorts requiring every public school now in America to give biological males who say they are psychologically female, so-called transgender, give them access to girls' showers, dressing areas, restrooms. And so the administration threatens school districts like the one in Palatine, Illinois, recently, with the loss of federal funding if they refuse to comply with this new regulation. Hundreds of girls and boys walked out of Hillsborough High School in Hillsborough, Missouri, recently to protest this invasion of their privacy. And now this new uproar is happening at a time when many parents around the country are very concerned about the way federal funding has been used to leverage the change of their school curriculums through the so-called Common Core in 46 states, with little input, if any, from parents in many places. So I wonder what you would do as president to guarantee that federal funding would not be used to compel school districts in this way to require girls to shower with boys. And what else you would do to stem the growing misuse of federal power over regulations, testing, and so on, and funding, and restore to parents and local communities control over their children's education.
Well, I think it's an outrage that that the government would try to enforce that kind of intimate behavior, like showering in locker rooms like that, in dual sex situations like that. I think that's wrong. I think it's wrong, and is outside of the American culture, of course. And young girls or boys, either one, are going to be entitled to their privacy in a public setting. Seems to me that the government or the state or the community has an obligation to protect that privacy, those privacy rights. And nobody should come in out of Washington or any place else and try to impose that on that community. I think it's wrong. And as president, we can say it's wrong and we can do what's necessary to try to work very hard to prevent it. But you raise even a larger point, and that is the question of the coercion. Once again, the use of the managerial, the administrative, the regulatory state to coerce. Common Core is an example of that. Now, I think, I don't want to speak for them, but it is my understanding that at least two of my opponents support Common Core principles and out of the federal government. The former Governor Jeb Bush and Governor John Kasich, I believe both are supportive of the Common Core approach. Well, the Common Core approach was developed by the Governors Association. I used to be a member of that, and they're no friends to the individual, as a whole, I can assure you. And they created this sort of principles and systems of a Common Core federal standards of education. But then the federal government said, oh, we like that. We'll now use the forcing power of the taxes and tax exempt status and so on to make schools adhere to Common Core. Well, that's wrong. I was a governor that had my hands in the education system. When I ran for governor, I said that I was going to be a steward of the public schools and that I was going to add 4,000 new teachers and to reduce class sizes and create a better kind of environment. And I did that. I did those things. And I believe that the ability to develop curricula, which we did when I was governor, with standards, local standards and state standards. I believe that curriculum and management of these schools belongs best at the local level, where the families can work together and create the proper environment for education within the public, and for that matter, the other alternative schools, parochial, private schools, homeschooling. All of that can be done and managed in an appropriate way, with the state coming in and providing the additional support and weight to make it a success. The federal government has no role in this, and Common Core is wrong and should be rejected. And as President of the United States, I'm not going to impose it.
You do have a record as Virginia's governor with the standards of learning, I recall, under your administration. That was a sort of a Richmond solution, not a Washington solution, to certain problems in the quality and testing of educational achievement by students. But refresh my memory, Governor. Did the standards of learning norms under your administration turn over a lot of control to localities and local school boards and local parents?
We set down some state standards, which then could be a guide to the localities, but the implementation of it is still best kept at the local area.
Okay.
And then, of course, we had the President Bush then brought in a federal system over top of all of that, No Child Left Behind. So we ended up with an awful lot of testing, and I would have to go back now and see exactly how that all came out. But yes, we really decided to do it at the state level and working through the localities, and I still think that's best today.
Is it appropriate to think perhaps of withdrawing the federal government entirely or almost entirely from a role in education, perhaps abolish the Department of Education or things of that sort?
Yeah, my looking at the Department of Education is it's primarily a funding tool. They take money and then use that as a control device in the states and the localities, and I don't think that's an appropriate use of federal money.
So maybe block grants could replace the federal Department of, the Department of Education seems to be a place where a lot of federal bureaucrats have full employment to get in other people's business, right? And is it what you're telling me is that they oughtn't to be in that business? So maybe we could do without
I'm telling
them?
you, we ought not to be in that business.
Okay.
When I become the president, I will make sure that the Department of Education is thoroughly reviewed. And if there's value in it, then we will keep it. And if it's really, as you and I are discussing here, then I think that money is better spent someplace else. Now, frankly, you stopped me a minute with block grants.
Sure.
I get a little nervous about that. That means the federal government keeps taking the money and then controlling, even though it's a block grant.
Yeah.
Frankly, I would rather have a conscious decision to reduce taxes and make sure that taxation then goes into the proper place where money should be spent for education.
It does seem a strange sort of arrangement that Virginia taxpayers or in any other state should send money to Washington for Washington to send back to Richmond. Wouldn't it make more sense to reduce their taxes paid to Washington and then let perhaps Richmond have the revenue directly if it was a wash, if it was...
That's what I think.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at it when I become the president. I think there and the Environmental Protection Agency are the two regulatory bodies we'll look at first.
EPA. All right. Well, you alluded earlier to the necessity for government in our time not to go back to a more laissez-faire attitude towards welfare and safety nets, but instead to care for people who have slipped through the cracks of our economy. In this, you sound very much on the same page as our bishops, the Catholic bishops, for viewers here at EWTN. The Catholic Church teaches and has taught since Pope Leo in the 13th, at the end of the 19th century, that there's a preferential option for the poor in Catholic social doctrine. Catholics believe then that in public policy, the very first question to be asked about any policy proposal is, what is its impact on the weakest and most vulnerable members of our community? The unborn, the developmentally disabled, the physically handicapped, the mentally or physically impaired, people mired in poverty. Now, it's also true that policies that help the more well-off can also help the least well-off by creating employment opportunities and lifting general prosperity in the country at large. So I wonder what in particular you would propose to do to help middle-class Americans and poor Americans to prosper.
First, Matt, I think there's an appropriate role for the church in performing this function, and I think it should be encouraged. I think it should be discussed. I think that the congregants and people across the country ought to understand that that is a principal role, not just of the Catholic Church, but the entire community of faith in the United States. So I believe that's an appropriate thing. But we don't discuss that much today because there's an expectation that the welfare state is just simply going to do it. And it makes it really harder, if you will, for the societies to do their work. But I want to come to the heart of the matter. I don't know what your other candidates are saying in these kinds of programs or not, but I want your viewers to understand the signature, most important issue for Jim Gilmore when I become the president. And that is the empowerment of people through a more robust and vigorous economy that provides more opportunities for people. Now today, we have a slow growth economy. We have a slow growth economy because of deliberate laws and regulations that have been put into place that somebody out there thinks creates a higher value and a higher result than the independence, liberty, growth, and wealth of the American people.
You're thinking of things like Obamacare, Dodd-Frank.
You bet I am. This is what I'm thinking. We have today terrible regulations have been put into place. Environmental protection agencies, nobody wants dirty water or dirty air, but they have created an environment right now where it's very hard to create jobs and to have opportunities for entrepreneurs to create something. Dodd-Frank has now almost wrecked the ability of community banks to make loans to small businesses to get started in order to employ more people. We have had taxes increased and imposed over the last 8 years, which are designed to prevent and to discourage investment in this country. And investment is what creates jobs. It creates opportunities for people. I am committed to a more robust economy. I have a specific program to do it that I call the Growth Code. And it talks about a tax reform for individuals that simplifies the code and makes sure people get a tax cut, that takes all commercial activities, small and large, and combines it together and charges it 15%, which all of a sudden makes us competitive with the rest of the world.
I'm sorry, you'll have to explain. 15%, so are we talking about a flat tax for all income, business, and corporate or personal?
Yes, no, commercial activity. All commercial activity, okay. Small business and major business, all commercial activity should not be treated differently anymore. All commercial activity together. If you charge it a 15% rate, gotcha, then at that point you're in a position to actually build up the economy. The elimination of the death tax. Yeah, not because everybody's rich, but because frankly, it's sending a message into the community that if you build something, if you create a family farm, you create a small business, you're going to be able to pass it down to your children, right, without it being sold off for government taxes. That's the message you want to send. And a few other things like that, a few more tweaks with the Growth Code, you can actually create a real robust economy. What result? Well, today we have 9 million Americans that are working part-time that want to work full-time because there's no jobs. We have, everybody agrees, everybody, left, right, up and down, liberal, conservative, agree the wages are stagnant.
Labor force participation is down.
Labor force participation is at its lowest rate in many, many, many years. Why? It's down because we have a deliberate slow growth economy that has to be repaired. There has to be a president who is willing to recognize this and to say something must be done. So that young people, for example, they come out of colleges and universities. What's going on in America today? Mothers and fathers are breaking their backs to send their kids to college because tuition is just completely out of control. It's a separate issue altogether. But the fact is the debt is going up. Young people are coming out of college with a great deal of debt and no career opportunities. Yeah. And I will tell you now, if a young person comes out of college and is making $30,000 instead of the $60,000 that's appropriate to their degree, they never catch up. The policies that we're doing today, the policies we're doing today are creating a lost generation of young people. Yeah. As you can see, I'm very excited about this. As president, I'm committed to more opportunities for the creation of wealth and the creation of independence in this country and the fulfillment of our lives, which then creates the ability to really enjoy fully the values that we've talked about in this interview.
Any pro-growth tax policy, regulatory policy, even a multi-front attack on EPA, Dodd-Frank, Obamacare, the tax code, even the best economy humming along at full employment and rapid growth is going to leave some people behind. Some people are going to, probably in many cases through no fault of their own, they're going to not be aided, they're not going to be lifted up. Some of the boats will not rise with this rising tide. I don't hear you saying that you would leave them behind at all. But you mentioned the churches and what they can do. Are there partnerships of government and civil society that can be fruitful here? President George W. Bush, for instance, inaugurated the very first White House Office of Faith-Based Programs. Is that something? I think it's actually fallen into disuse by the Obama administration. One hears hardly anything of it. Is that something you would revive and try to strengthen?
My experience is that when government begins to partner with private institutions, they proceed to begin to regulate the private institutions.
Yeah.
So I would be cautious about these kinds of technical partnerships. But I believe a president can actually begin to state what is an appropriate role for the private institutions and to encourage them and state that these are proper functions and proper roles. Now, you're quite right. I haven't called for throwing people out of Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security, any of those things. I think that the growth of those things can be reasonably controlled. They're double and triple indexed now. I think they can be reasonably controlled. But the strategy of a Gilmore administration will be to create such a growing economy that there's more revenue and growth and wealth that begins to create a positive gap, a positive growth opportunity for people so that money can in fact be applied to the reduction of debt and the creation of more wealth in people's pockets so that they can have more independence and self-sufficiency.
Well, it sounds very Reagan-esque, and it sounds like you're very much inspired by the historic example of President Ronald Reagan. Reagan, of course, often paid tribute to his own roots as a descendant of immigrants, Irish immigrants in his case. And as everyone recognizes, America is a nation of immigrants. Immigration's always been a source of strength for our community. Now it's risen to become a very prominent issue in this presidential campaign season. The Catholic bishops have long been on the record favoring a version of comprehensive immigration reform that would combine a generous and welcoming policy for legal immigrants and humane treatment for those who are here illegally, so that there are not mass deportations or the separation of family members from one another through deportation. Do you agree with the bishops of the Catholic Church? Do you disagree with aspects of their position as I've described it? How would you handle the immigration issue in general? It's such a big campaign issue.
I think I'm pretty close to the Catholic bishops. Let me talk about this just a minute. I actually deplore this campaign. I think that this campaign on the issue of immigrants is really deplorable. Donald Trump actually emerged in this campaign by beating up on Hispanics and characterizing Hispanics in a particular way. I think that is wrong. I think that anytime you begin to separate people by ethnicity or faith and then begin to burden those people in some way or begin to say to the rest of the community, these are bad people, that is very, very dangerous in terms of our historical understanding of things. I deplore it. And actually I gave a speech in Florida at their Sunshine Summit in which I actually said that that kind of behavior, that kind of talk was fascistic and was not appropriate for the great Republican Party. Yes, it was probably the only person who had spoken out at that point. And then later on is a doubling down. Now there's a complaint about Muslims and a statement that somehow, we need to reduce people in this society or exclude people on the basis of their religious faith. This is wrong and dangerous, wrong. And I deplore it, and I think this is pretty awful. Now, here's where I stand about this. We have inherited a terrible problem here. There are millions of people who are here now illegally, and they know they're illegal. And it creates a lot of complexity at this point. I would not be in favor of putting people on boxcars and shipping them out of the country. I would not be in favor of some sort of secret police, which has been proposed by Donald Trump, in order to go chase people down and track people down. Sure. I think that that's sacrificing the values of America in order to attempt to address this problem that has created such anger in the society. I believe that you're going to have to allow people to have a work permit and to come out and to be here and to work legally. Mm-hmm. But I do not favor a path to citizenship. That if you're here illegal, you know you're illegal, you should not have an open path to citizenship. That's been my view from the beginning of the campaign. I think that sanctuary cities are wrong and must be they must adhere to the federal law.
Let me explain to our viewers. Some may not know. Sanctuary cities is an expression for a practice that some liberal big city mayors have undertaken around the country, of saying that illegal immigrants are welcome there and they will affirmatively refuse to cooperate with immigration authorities in finding illegal immigrants. It's a kind of defiance of federal authority over this
Isn't
question.
that interesting? Everybody gets angry with the faith community because they're angry with federal edicts. But then at the same time, when the federal government comes in and wants to enforce the immigration law, the left says it's just fine for sanctuary cities.
Very interesting point.
But my point is this: I'm a former Virginia governor. I understand the history of the United States, and the federal law must be adhered to. And I have not taken an inconsistent position on that in anything in this interview, I don't believe. But the point is that I'm not in favor of that kind of activity. Illegal immigrants that commit crimes are going to be fully prosecuted and then deported. We're going to begin now anew to actually obey the immigration laws, and people who come here and stay illegally are going to have to leave. And we're going to control our border. I think that we have to because of the nature of things and the way things have developed.
Now, so border security would be a part of a Gilmore immigration package.
Yes.
Just now you said that people who come here illegally have to leave, and then they can, without prejudice to them perhaps, reapply to come in. But I think I heard you say earlier, Governor, that there are a number of persons here illegally whose status you would be willing, under the right circumstances and through the right mechanisms, you would be willing to legalize their status without making them depart the country first. But you would bar them from any path.
I think that we'll have to grandfather this 10 or 12 million people. That's the only way to address this issue. But I'm not willing to grandfather the next 12 million. Is my point. Or unless the laws change, we must adhere to the law at that point. One more point. Donald Trump suggested also that we begin to question birthright citizenship in this country under the Constitution. I want your viewers to know that I oppose that. I'm in favor. I believe that the Constitution does give birthright citizenship, and my study of history is that when you begin to question the birthright citizenship of people who are here in this country and born in this country, that sends a dreadful message and a dangerous message, and I'm opposed to that position of Donald Trump.
I'll explain for our viewers again, just very quickly, that birthright citizenship refers to that clause at the very beginning of the 14th Amendment, which we were discussing earlier in another context. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. And there was some litigation actually at the end of the 19th century concerning an American-born person of Chinese descent whose parents had come here as immigrants. They were legally here but not eligible to be citizens. And so Mr. Wong Kim Ark he visited China and returned, and he was denied entry to the United States. He was told he was not a citizen. Went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, that first sentence of the 14th Amendment means born here, citizen here. And you're right. Donald Trump has begun to question this interpretation of the Constitution that the Supreme Court decided over a century ago, and you oppose him on that.
I do oppose him on that, and I appreciate that cogent explanation of this. But the main point is that whole discussion begins to send a message into the Hispanic community that somehow they're not welcome, accepted, or even their children legal.
Yeah.
That is not the kind of message Jim Gilmore is going to send as President of the United States.
There has been an interesting evolution of this issue during the campaign, and I think you've put your finger on the cause, which is chiefly Mr. Trump. 2.5 years ago, there were more people willing to contemplate granting illegal immigrants a legal status, but perhaps not a path to citizenship, essentially the position you still hold. But some of those candidates are now saying, no, not even legalized status. And,
no, they're joining the mob, and I refuse to join the mob. I will make one point, though, that I think your viewers deserve to know, and that is the whole issue of people coming here in order simply to have children and grant them that citizenship under the 14th Amendment. They think they've been calling that anchor babies or something like that. I think that should be addressed. I just think it can be addressed a different way besides attacking the citizenship rights in the Constitution.
One hears of this happening actually not just with poor Latin American immigrants coming across the Rio Grande, but pregnant Chinese tourists of the wealthy elite of China arriving to have their babies in the United States.
I understand
so they can send them back here as adults.
I believe that it can be addressed through the visa process without attacking the Constitution.
Yeah.
That's my point that I want to make to your viewers.
I understand. Thanks for your answer on that. Let me come back to our top question, since we have just a little bit of time left. You've gone through some very important issues with us today, Governor Gilmore, regarding fundamental problems of immigration, of poverty, of prosperity, of religious liberty, of the right to life. Is there any summation you would give about the shape that the current administration is leaving our country in with respect to those ideals and institutions and fundamental principles of American society that we began with?
You know, I wish we had another 20 minutes to talk about national security and foreign policy, which is a particular experience of mine as a United States Army intelligence veteran, as a person who chaired the National Commission on Homeland Security for the United States, as the governor during the 9/11 attack. And we could talk about that, but in summary, I believe that if I had to fault the president in the greatest way today, it has been his message that he's been sending through his executive orders and in other ways that he's in disregard of the law. What I've attempted to do here today for your viewers and for you, Matt, is to show that you can still be an adherent to the Constitution. You can still be a true believer in the rule of law in this country and the liberties that it protects. And at the same time, harmonize that with the values that we have as Christians and as people who can go forward together with values. These things don't need to be at war with each other.
Yeah.
They don't need to be. And I think I've expressed today a way of striking that in the appropriate way so that these two rights and liberties don't have to be at war with each other but can live side by side in a way that creates a decent, humane society that has its proper values.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Governor Gilmore. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. I'd like to thank Governor Gilmore for joining me on Candidate Conversations 2016, and thank you, the viewers of EWTN, for joining us. We hope to see you again for the next Candidate Conversations 2016.